People don't realize the trauma of losing your freedom. My father was a regular army officer, and I was born in one of the garrisons in which he was posted. And of course, they vacated the barracks when they went to war in September 1939. And of course, in 1940, the German stationed a regiment there, and they used to march around from that barracks, which was at the back of our house, singing. And it must be said, they sang rather well together as they marched. But I mean, I remember one of the songs was Und wir gehen gegen England, and we go against England or something like that. It was awful. Le Mans was a garrison town. There were several regiments, and the Germans had a list of all the officers' addresses, and they were going systematically round in order to billet German officers on French officers' homes. Our neighbors said the Germans are coming round, but they said, we hear that the Germans are terrified of TB, tuberculosis. So we hatched a plot whereby if the Germans came to us to billet an officer, I would go to the door, because I was learning German at school, German and English, and I was going to say, meine Großmutter hat Tuberkulosen, or words to that effect. Anyway, a German NCO, Feldwebel, and a soldier came to the door, and we had rehearsed that grandmother, who was small, very slight, lovely person, would come down. We had a long corridor in the house, would come down, coughing her head off when I said that meine Großmutter had tuberculosis. It's incredible. And the Germans crossed our name off that list. Can you imagine if we had had a German officer billeted in our small house? Really, it would have been unbearable. The sense of humiliation cannot be underestimated. If you are a patriot and your own country is being sullied by an arch enemy, it is unacceptable. The worst part of it was the sight of the enemy, to have Germans strutting around, and people don't realize the trauma of losing your freedom of action, freedom of speech. You were not allowed to leave your home between 7 or 8 p.m. and 7 a.m. So it was being confined to barracks, this idea of not being able to do what you like in your own country. It was quite strict very quickly, because the demands of the vast German armies were such that they requisitioned lots of the food, and we had rationing cards, but as time went on, shops were empty. Whereas in Britain, at least, people had rationing, but you could get something. The enemy wasn't pinching half of it. Then it got worse, of course. I always say by 1942 onwards, people in towns, in particular, were starving. You felt as you walked past Germany, if only I could kill him. Yes, because they had no business to be where they were and to do what they did. When the Germans went into a cafe, officers carried a pistol, which they kept, but soldiers used to take off their bayonet and hang the bayonet and the belt on, which they have in French cafe, coat hangers, where you hang your coats from. So we used to go around with a piece of string to which we attached a bicycle pump, and that was our bayonet. So we would march into a cafe where the Germans were sitting and then take our bayonet off and hang it on top, our piece of string and our bicycle on top of the German's belt. And now they didn't think it was funny at all, so they would shout, "Rouse, rouse!" And of course, all the French would roar with laughter because they found it was funny, but the Germans didn't. Then we marched out very proudly with our bayonet and our piece of string and felt, I mean, it sounds absolutely childish, and I'm almost hesitating in mentioning it because it's ridiculous. But from our point of view, we just showed that we were not amused. They were not amused, but it's just a small gesture. And then walking around, leaving school, if there were some Germans walking on the pavement, we would sort of discreetly push each other. Désolé, désolé. When again and again, discreetly, we were trying to show that we didn't really welcome the presence of the enemy amongst us. We refused to accept that we were defeated and it was going to be for life, that the enemy would be occupying the country for life. And what kept us alive, I always say, was the fact that we were able to listen to the French service of the BBC. We only had access to newspapers which reprinted the triumph of the German army all over Europe. That was so wounding to read that day after day. But it was, of course, forbidden to listen to the BBC because the Germans were aware that the BBC French service incited us to resist and to do what we could. They requisitioned radios, but you could always hide your radio or pretend you didn't have one. You made sure that the windows were closed and so on. And then the Germans used to have a system whereby, as you listened to the radio, you heard they superimpose a sound like no, 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 which made it very difficult to listen to what was said. So you had that background noise imposed through the waves by the Germans. And it was dangerous because if you were caught listening to it, then you were arrested, yes. As early as the winter of 1940, some of our friends were printing leaflets and so on, say, do not give up, we must fight on, and sort of dish them out to people like us who they knew were against this occupation. And then we would distribute those to show people that there was, some of us were not accepting that situation. And then we would listen to the bulletins, copy the essential piece of information, and then again dish those out to people. And again, if you were arrested carrying a BBC bulletin, you were maltreated. I mean, I had some friends who were beaten up seriously just for being caught with a copy of the BBC bulletin for that day. General de Gaulle, who was completely unknown at the time, said, France has lost the battle, but has not lost the war, and I invite French people, wherever they are, to join me to carry on the fight with our allies. And at the time, the only other country fighting was England, was Britain. So he became the symbol and the head of the French resistance. He was a raison d'être. Living in occupied France felt like being in a foreign country in a way, in a country occupied by foreigners. So he was the symbol of eternal France, if you like. But the main thing was they kept us aware of the fact that there was some fighting going on and that Germans were not winning all over the place. And all he did was to just try to encourage us and to show us that the propaganda we were subjected to through the Vichy government, through Pétain's government, was rather rubbish, and that the Allies were slowly but surely fighting towards eventual liberation, because that's what we were dying to get, to be free, to be liberated. I mean, I just wanted an end to this dreadful feeling of not being to be able to be yourself in your own country, and being aware that you were one of millions feeling the same. Oh yes, it was painful, yeah.